Hey everyone, it's Alex and welcome back to my channel. It's been such a long time since I've made a haunted places video, and I think the last time I made a haunted places video was October 2nd, 2024, and I think that was about 2 weeks before I got engaged. But more updates, we got married. A lot has happened in the past 2 years. So we decided to elope on October 25th, 2025, and I'll plug some photos. My amazing friend Stacy took our photos. I don't know what last name she goes by because she also recently just got married, but Sincerely Photography, I believe, is her business name, and she was so awesome. The photos turned out so great. It was such an amazing day. I would like to do a video of just like talking about the whole wedding process and everything. Also, I don't know if you have been keeping an eye on my page recently, but I started to stream over on Twitch. But if you're not on Twitch, that's okay, or you miss my random streams whenever I can have free time to stream. I am uploading those streams onto YouTube. If you want to see some games, I'm just kind of like a chill gamer. Maybe one day, maybe, because my husband keeps wanting to like make me play a scary game. I like to watch people play scary games. I just don't like to play them. Maybe one day, but don't hold your breath. I like cozy games, RPG, maybe some strategy, just hanging out and chilling. So that's sort of like my vibe. But anyway, today we are going to be talking about the Belmont Mansion. So I did these notes back in January and I've been sitting on this for a hot minute. We didn't know that it was going to be haunted when we went there. This was a part of our Nashville vacation. A couple of years ago. I can't remember even when we went. Just a warning, there's going to be so much history on, like, just so much. I went on a bit of a rabbit hole. I will leave a time here. If you don't care about the history, which is crazy because there's so much that we have to talk about just with the family. There's so much that happens. And like, I'm just like nosy Nancy here. I don't know. I just needed to know what the was happening. Let's go. So construction began on the Belmont Mansion in 1850 and was completed through phases until 1860 by contractors and enslaved people. The name was originally Belmont or Belmonte or Beautiful Mountain. It's an Italian villa-style mansion with 36 rooms. It's really big. It was the largest home built in Tennessee pre-Civil War. The estate covered 175 acres, which included a water tower to irrigate the gardens, a 200-foot long greenhouse, a conservatory, an art gallery, gazebos, a bowling alley, a bathhouse, and, of course, a zoo. And then today, only the water tower and the gazebos are still standing. So who on earth lived here? Like, what is going on? Who are these people? Like, this is wealthy of the wealthy. So let's start with the owner of this mansion, Miss Ma'am herself, one of the wealthiest women in the South. Yes, you can probably guess why. And they are not good people. I'm really tired of going to mansions in the South. I'm really tired of it. So her name is Addalicia Hayes Franklin Acklin Cheatham. All of that, was a well-known socialite and left quite an impact on Nashville. She was the daughter of Oliver Bliss Hayes and Sarah Hightower Hayes on March 15th, 1817. Her father was a lawyer, judge, and the cousin of Rutherford B. Gase, who was the 19th president of the United States. Do you remember that name? Because I don't. She was raised in downtown Nashville and attended the Nashville Female Academy. After she graduated, she got engaged at only 17 years old to Alphonso Gibbs, who was a Harvard graduate, but unfortunately he passed away shortly before their wedding day in 1834. In 1839, at the age of 22, she married Isaac Franklin, who was a wealthy businessman and a plantation owner who was 50 years old. That is a 28-year age gap. What on earth would they even have to talk about? What do they even have in common? 7 short years later, after they got married, Isaac unfortunately fell ill with a stomach virus and passed away while visiting one of his plantations in Louisiana. He left her with their current estate, which was worth $900,000 at the time. So let me do the math. Hold on. Let me do the math. I didn't do the math on this one. Woo! Sorry. Which is about $23.9 million today. This included 7 Louisiana cotton plantations which were about 8,700 acres in total, a 2,000-acre farm in Gallatin, Tennessee, more than 50,000 acres of undeveloped land in Matagorda Bay, Texas, and 750 slaves. To put that in perspective, they were basically the Bill Gates of slave owners. So they're not good people. I'm just going to say that. They're not good people. They had 4 children together: Victoria, Addalicia, Julius Caesar, and Emma. Warning, this is the 1800s, so you can probably guess. In 1844, Julius Caesar passed away only 13 hours after birth due to complications. Victoria and Addalicia passed away within days of each other in 1846, just days after they returned home from retrieving their father's body for burial. Addalicia was 4 when she passed from bronchitis, and Victoria passed away at 6 years old from the croup. And I had to look this up because I have never heard of this. So croup, it's CROUP. Sorry if I mispronounce anything. It's an infection of the upper airway, which sounds awful. In 1855, at the age of 11, Emma passed away from diphtheria, which is a serious bacterial infection affecting the nose and throat. It forms like a false membrane in your throat that hinders breathing and swallowing, which like at 11. So potentially fatal heart and nerve damage by the bacterial toxin in the blood. Like, oh my God, that sounds awful. This is super rare today because of vaccines. The last reported case in the United States was in 1997. Emma was the only Franklin child to live in the Belmont Mansion. In 1849, Addalicia entered her second marriage at the age of 32 with Joseph A.S. Acklin. So Joseph was a Mexican War veteran and a lawyer from Huntsville, Alabama. He signed a prenup, which is one of the earliest ever recorded in Nashville history, that would give his wife complete control over the businesses, the property, and the assets that she brought into the marriage. Shortly after they got married, they started to build the Belmont Mansion. So this was actually designed to be their summer home. Rich people shit. Their mansion was the hit of the town. Their private park and zoo were actually open to the public. Joseph would help Addalicia with the businesses, but she was very actively involved. She was the Bill Gates of the slave owners, but she did kind of inherit it through marriage and all that stuff. She was a businesswoman for sure, but like, damn, why did it have to be slavery? Like, Addalicia and Joseph had 6 children together. There was Joseph, Laura. So I'll let this play. It's either this way, Corny, or Corini. It kind of sounds like Courtney, but Corini. Carini, William, Claude, and Pauline. And again, sorry. Laura and Courtney were twin girls born in 1852. They were born 30 minutes apart, and they died at the age of 3 from scarlet fever. When Addalicia took a trip to Europe after the Civil War, she bought a statue of 2 sleeping babies, and it had inscribed Laura and Courtney. And then the other 4 children did survive into adulthood. Unfortunately, Joseph passed away in 1863 after 14 years of marriage. Like many socialites, Addalicia began her charity work. She started just a few years before the Civil War began and then continued during the war. In the beginning, she invested about $2,000 towards a brand new Maxwell House Hotel. In 1861, she was elected treasurer of the Ladies Soldiers Friends Society. Real quick history. Women always come together during war. There were about 20,000 ladies military aid societies or soldiers' aid societies throughout the Civil War in both the North and the South. Organized and run by local women, they would support the soldiers by providing food, textile goods like clothing, socks, tents, and bandages. They would provide transportation networks to deliver the supplies into the field. They would hold fundraisers like concerts, dinners, and dances to help fund support. After the war, they shifted their focus into veterans and orphans, helped families apply for pensions, provided aid for disabled soldiers, and created memorial associations. In 1864, she served on the board of Nashville Refugee Clothing Association, which helped support refugees of the war and assisted Union women arriving in Nashville who were searching for their husbands and their sons. In 1867, at the age of 50, Addalicia married a third and final husband named Dr. William Archer Cheatham, who was a Nashville physician. Also in 1867, she gave a bell to the First Presbyterian Church, which is now named the Downtown Presbyterian Church. She also purchased $25,000 in city bonds at the time, 1867, which that's a lot of money. So in today's money, that's a little over $500,000 in city bonds. For post-war city redevelopment. She became the vice president of the Davidson County Auxiliary of Orphan Asylum in Clarksville. That's a bit of a mouthful. She donated a large amount to the Protestant orphanage in Nashville and continued to raise money for orphanages throughout the rest of her life. In the 1880s, Addalicia served on the board of directors for the Working Women Exchange, which helped women get jobs outside of the home when they had no men at home to provide for them. If we didn't have the slavery, she would have been a good person, right? This is very feminist of her. So Addalicia and Joseph were also known as major art collectors, as rich people are. She often would loan her collections to many exhibitions, including the Southern Industrial Exhibition in 1871, the Nashville Centennial of 1880, the New Orleans World Fair in 1884 and 1885. She had a very extensive knowledge of art and had a very deep love for it. She was actually appointed by the governor in 1875 to serve on the committee to make selections for the Tennessee exhibit at the United States Centennial in Philadelphia. In December of 1884, Addalicia and her 3 adult children moved from Nashville to Florida. The following spring, they then moved up to Washington, D.C., where she lived out the rest of her years until May of 1887. And then William passed away 3 years later in 1900. We gotta talk about these husbands. I did a lot of digging because we just briefly talk about them boop, and then we're gonna talk about the children because there's a lot. And we get weird. And I'm nosy. I gotta know because I would learn one little bit of information, then I'm what on earth is happening here? And then I just... Okay, so the first husband is Isaac Franklin. So he actually was the Bill Gates of slave trading. I don't really want to talk about him too long, just to kind of cover him real quick. He wasn't a good person. He was born in 1789. He served in the War of 1812. He worked for his brother on a flatboat that ran from Gallatin to New Orleans, and he got the horrible idea to enter the slave trade business. He married Addalicia at the age of 50 in 1839, and then he died in 1846 while visiting his Louisiana plantation, which I think is just karma catching up to him. Just a weird morbid fact, because I found this information, they put his body in alcohol to help preserve it while they moved it back on a riverboat trip all the way back to Tennessee. Which, yeah. So the second husband is Joseph Acklin. So he was born in 1816. Fun fact, his grandfather was John Hunt, who was the founder of Huntsville. If you're from Huntsville, that's who this guy is. At the age of 14, he attended the brand new University of Alabama. Most of his 51 classmates became important early leaders in the state. He attended for 4 years, but there's no record that he actually graduated, but he did receive an interest in architecture. I don't know what that means, but he had an interest in architecture, so that explains the Belmont Mansion. I think there was a lot of him in there. But mostly it was just a classical education. He fought in the Texas Revolution and he escaped a massacre while most of his men were executed. His company had already left Texas to return home right at the right time. After the war, he was appointed the United States Attorney for North Alabama Judicial District in 1840 by President Martin Van Buren, which was, do you know which president this was? Come on. Because you definitely remember that name. Because because I've never heard of him. He was the 8th president, so he was appointed by the president. At some point, he studied law with his older brother because during this new job, he operated a law practice. In April of 1847, he attended a ball while visiting Nashville, where he met the recently widowed Adddition Franklin. The ball was held by Mr. and Mrs. John Bell, who had no relation to the Bell family, who owned the Bell Witch House, because I've covered that as well, and they're also known as the Bell family. But the Bell Witch was 40 years prior to this time, which is also funny because it's only about like 30 miles, I think, northeast of Nashville. It's not really that far away, but they probably knew of the story during this time. They had no relation. 2 years later, he resigned as U.S. attorney, moved to Nashville, and married Addalicia. One day before they got married, Addalicia asked Joseph to sign a marriage contract, which is a prenup, stating that she would retain ownership and control of all of the property that she brought into the marriage, and he agreed. The next day, they married at her home on Cherry Street. Not sure where the couple honeymooned, but they did show up in New Orleans on November 6th. Joseph did help manage the properties after they got married, but before they got married, Addalicia's father held legal responsibility, so we clearly know why she asked for the prenup, because women did not have rights to own anything, so she was protecting herself. They started construction on the Belmont Mansion in October of 1849, and it took nearly 3 years to build it. The family moved into the mansion in the late summer of 1853. Additions were added, more structures were built on the ground. The architecture and the building of the mansion and the property were mainly Joseph's interests. And then after his death, Addalicia only added one more building to the property. So Joseph was a part of the Tennessee Democratic Party. This is before they switched, so Republican actually. In February of 1862, during the Civil War, Fort Donelson, which was upriver of Nashville, fell to the Union. The Confederates didn't defend the city, so Joseph and a third of Nashville fled the city. He went to Louisiana to manage the plantations while Addalicia stayed at the Belmont. Like, peace out, girl, peace out. So the location of the plantation was on the Mississippi River at the mouth of the Red River, and it was a prime spot for crossing of Confederate troops, even though it was controlled by Federal gunboats. Their plantations were close to both armies, and their cotton storage was always in constant danger of being burned or confiscated. Both armies would rather just destroy the cotton than have the other side benefit from it. So in the summer and the fall of 1863, the Confederates were threatening Joseph for not burning his cotton, which was about 8,500 bales. And I decided to do the math on like what this was worth, because I actually have no idea like what that value is. So between 1863 and 1864, cotton was probably the most expensive during this time. During the Civil War, the price of cotton skyrocketed. So there's kind of like a range, and this is actually priced on the New York value. I don't really know what it is in like Louisiana. This would have been between $5,780 at the lowest value, or the most expensive value, which you could sell, which was about like $16,065. In today's money, this is about $153,731.03. At the lowest value, or the highest value, would be around $427,281.82. So, yeah. The Federal Army offered to protect him, but he refused out of fear of the Confederates. Eventually, against his will, the Federal Army provided protection. Later that same year in August, Joseph fell really ill. He was tired and he was sick. His arthritis was so bad that he could barely write. He wrote to Addalicia on August 20th and said that the South had no chance of winning the war. Slavery was finished and he was glad of it. And then on September 11th, 1863, he passed away at the plantation at the age of 47. The newspaper called it a bilious remnant fever, or malaria. Now we're going to talk about the third husband, William Cheatham, and I went down a rabbit hole and also a side story of a different location because it's relevant, kind of. If you want to skip to this time and you don't care, I'm going to be talking a lot about this, and we'll just skip past this and then we'll get on to the children. So it's up to you. But It's very fascinating. So William was born in 1820 in Springfield. He received his medical degree in 1843 from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. He married his first wife, Mary Emma Reddy, in 1847, and they had 2 children. He was practicing medicine in Nashville until he was appointed to superintendent and physician of the brand new Tennessee Lunatic Asylum. Like, oh honey, I went down a rabbit hole. During this time, this Tennessee Lunatic Asylum was horrendous. And because of backlash from the public, they were kind of forced to reopen a brand new hospital. So the hospital was built in response to the reform movement throughout Tennessee. This new hospital was named the Central State Hospital for the Insane. And so this was opened in 1852 in southeast Nashville. 2 years after this, his wife unfortunately passed away, and then he married Addalicia in 1867 and established a private practice in Nashville until his death in 1900. It's funny how short of a history lesson that we get from some of the websites that I was reading. That's all that they say, but there's so much more that happens. Like, if you're telling me that somebody was working in an insane asylum in the 1800s, you know I'm gonna deep dive. I have this weird, not like obsession, but just this weird fascination, morbid fascination with mental asylums because they should have never existed in the first place, to be real. Back then, they did not know how to treat mental illness or physical illness, or just they would lock up women in these places for menopause or PMS or just talking back to their husbands. There was some crazy that happened. And so I did a full history dive on this asylum because it no longer exists today. So this is the only history. So here's the tea on what happened at this place of work. So there's a woman, yay women, Dorothea A. Dix, D-I-X. Highly recommend looking into her. She was one of the many responsible for demanding better care for the mentally ill. She lobbied state legislators and Congress. In 1858, she stated that the new facility was one of the more superior hospitals at the time, which William was working there. He was in charge of it. But we all know that all of these insane asylums were still awful. It was better, but it was still bad. So we're going to rewind a decade. So she was investigating the care of mentally ill patients. She would teach classes to female prisoners in East Cambridge. People were locked up and medical needs were not being met, except in private hospitals. So she went into the basement of the prison where there were 4 mentally ill people in cells that were dark, bare, and the air was stagnant and foul. I can only imagine. They were labeled as loony paupers, locked up with violent criminals, and they received inhumane treatments. They were in cages, stalls, pens, and they were chained, naked, and beaten with rods and lashed into obedience. So she visited the first Tennessee Lunatic Asylum, which was overcrowded and understaffed. She found patients, quote, pining in cells and dungeons, bound with ropes, restrained in leathern thongs, and burned with chains, end quote. She published her findings and wrote to the Tennessee General Assembly. The doctors at the asylum would also write to them every year begging for more funding. And then they finally listened. And you can research more into her, but because of her, the new Central State Hospital was built. The history of insane asylums is very, very dark, but this was a stepping stone. Sadly, it was a very slow stepping stone into, I guess, what we have today, but you can't even compare the two, to be real. And we still have awful facilities around the United States that still abuse children and adults. If you want to look into Paris Hilton and her story, I think the place that she was forced to attend finally now just shut down, and they had their license removed this year, actually just this past week, I believe. So Mr. Dr. William Cheatham was one of those doctors. But apparently, Dix praised their advanced theories of moral treatment. Jesus Christ. Dix would often visit, as well as Dr. W.K. Bowling, who was the editor of the Nashville Journal of Medicine and Surgery. Sterling Cockrell and other trustees elected William to a second 8-year term in 1859 and gave him credit for the hospital's reputation as one of the best in the nation. Everyone just talks about like how great it was to have like new moral treatments, but like I don't believe them. I want to know what's truth. So according to this thesis paper that I came across by Anna Kate Holt, like many doctors at the time, William was not specialized in treating the mentally ill, but he did dedicate his life into learning how to cure it. So he helped move patients from the old facility to the new facility, which apparently went super well, which that's good. However, the building sucked. The bathrooms were miserably constructed, in quotes. They would flood the patients' rooms. They only had 130 rooms and 176 patients between 1852 and 1853. At most, they had at once was 100. But like every asylum, they became overcrowded pretty quickly. Now, the original plans for this facility, they were going to have 250 rooms, but of course, which happens still to this day, they had to cut down on size because of budget. They would continuously fight with the Tennessee state legislator. They would use sitting rooms and common rooms to accommodate patients. Between 1852 and 1859, they had 579 patients in their care. From 1857 to 1859, 67 patients were cured of their illnesses, probably like the women who didn't have shit wrong with them to begin with, but whatever. 36 had died, and about 345 patients are unaccounted for. Even though they were overcrowded, they still admitted people, which is like, they were very underfunded, which caused a lot of issues treating patients. Many people lived here full time because of their incurable illnesses. Some passed away and were buried on the grounds, but they still tried to treat people with moral treatments. So what were the rules that the staff had to follow? What were these moral treatments? They avoided talking about delusions, talked to them in a civil voice. Jesus Christ, like no verbally abusing patients, and they were to never talk about what caused the mental illness. They were to give medicine, to bathe, to clothe, and to help them take care of themselves. And then they would also search for missing patients, which is a no. They weren't really sure how many patients were to one attendant, but I can guess probably way too many because they were usually understaffed, underfunded. Now, there were no accounts available showing if abuse ever happened here, but we know throughout many other asylums in the United States that absolutely every single one of them had abuse. So then the Civil War happened and things really went downhill. The land around the hospital was a military advantage point for both sides. William struggled to get any supplies that he needed for the hospital between 1861 and 1862, and he was denied help by the officers. Money was pretty much gone pretty fast for a lot of reasons. On top of all of this, William was arrested and charged with treason due to suspicion of being a secessionalist supporter, which is someone who advocates for a region or state or group to politically separate from the larger country to form an independent nation, which in 1862, Unionist military governor Andrew Johnson sent a letter to fire William, and Dr. W.P. Jones would then be replacing him. William and his wife were arrested, and they were sent to federal prison in Alton, Illinois. However, when they were traveling north, the order was removed due to the declining health of Mrs. Cheatham. And of course, during the war, it was bad. Nobody had money to pay to be at this hospital. They couldn't get supplies. You could just like imagine how bad the conditions would get. And then after the war, the patient count doubled. They again asked the state for more money, and you can imagine the answer is probably, no. And then this is where he's like not a good person and he doesn't understand mental illness at all. But again, I don't think anyone understood mental illness at all in the 1800s, but he really downplayed the effect of war on the patients, even though that they were overcrowded with even more patients after the war. And they thought the war probably had no effect on people. Probably not. PTSD. They did not know what that was yet. So between 1865 to 1876, the hospital admitted 433 patients. 186 were discharged because they were either cured or they died. At one point, a woman accused the hospital of wrongfully admitting her, but they quickly dismissed her because she was probably insane. The doctor wrote, in quotes, "Some persons and communities are ever eager to catch at and credit sensational rumors prejudicial to the management of hospitals for the insane," and basically said, don't believe former patients. And he was probably talking about the Elizabeth Packard's The Prisoner's Hidden Life that was published in 1868. And if that doesn't say everything that you need to know, I think this is kind of evidence that they did abuse patients at this hospital. Don't believe them. Don't believe them. Abuse. Never heard of her. And then on March 14th, 1891, there was a fire which destroyed the west part of the building and killed half a dozen people. Patients were trapped inside. Are you ready to get even more angry at something totally different? So the staff evacuated 400 patients. 22 of the 28 in the burning section were able to escape, but unfortunately, 6 of them had no choice. They called the fire department, but they refused to respond until they could locate their chief. The staff and patients started a bucket brigade to help slow down the fire, and the fire department arrived 2 hours later. But wait, 2 fire trucks arrived 4 hours after the fire had started. The entire west wing was in ruins. 25 patients who were mostly harmless tried to escape, and all but one was found, but she later was found in a lake and she had drowned. I'm sorry, Jesus Christ. They have no idea how the fire started. So all of this kind of goes on for a while, but it only gets worse in the 1900s. There was so much overcrowding and the state would barely give them any funding, like they do probably today. Between 1912 and 1914, there were 768 patients, and the death toll rose. There is only one book that describes the history of the asylum, which is at the Tennessee State Library and Archives. It's called Central State from the Beginning, which was written in 1975, which states that in 1935, there were 2,300 patients with only 97 attendants. And they would mainly just give them relaxing drugs. Restraint systems were used on aggressive patients. And then in 1951, the first social worker and registered nurse appeared on the staff for the very first time. And of course, over decades and little funding, the building is slowly deteriorating. So you can just imagine the worst possible conditions ever. In the 1970s, a journalist named Frank Sutherland was an undercover patient and wrote about his findings. He said that they didn't have any qualified doctors. The housing was unsanitary, it smelled like urine and vomit, and there was violence between the staff and the patients. He stated that there was a doctor who knew that half of the doctors who worked in asylums did not have a license. These hospitals would blame the state for the lack of funding, and they felt like they were just being ignored, which is probably true. Publishing these findings caused a huge ripple. They moved patients from the condemned parts of the hospital. Jesus Christ, I forgot about that. They had patients in rubble. The general public started to finally become concerned about the conditions and lack of basic human rights. People started to create community-based mental health centers to replace the huge institutions. It was a very slow process. And apparently we don't really know much history between 1979 and the 1990s. It was finally shut down in 1995. The hospital moved to new facilities. The buildings were demolished in 1999 to make room for the existing Dell computer assembly plant that exists still to this day. How much you want to bet that place is super haunted? And finally, a huge shout out to this thesis paper written by Anna Kate Holt. It's called Seeking Voices in Dark Places, The History of the Tennessee Asylum for the Insane. This was submitted in August of 2023 to the Middle Tennessee State University as part of her Master's of Art in History. If you Google this, you can find the entire PDF because there's 117 pages of history and your girl did your research. I was struggling to find like any details about this asylum, but because of this thesis paper, I found everything. So huge shout out to Anna. This was absolutely amazing. And there's so much. So if you're curious, she has her thesis. Finally, we are going to be talking about the children who survived and what happened with them. Some are short, some are long. There's one really weird one because I'm nosy. First, we're going to talk about Joseph Hayes Ackland. So he was the firstborn son of Joseph and Addalicia. He was born in 1850. He became a lawyer, went to all of the fancy schools, and he practiced in Memphis. He married Haiti Bethel from Memphis in 1871. He moved to her sugar plantation in Pattersonville, St. Mary Parish, Louisiana, which is now called Patterson. Haiti died during childbirth as well as their baby. He inherited the plantation and stayed there until 1884. He was elected to the U.S. Congress and he served from 1878 to 1881. He returned to Nashville to continue to practice law. He was very active in state and local government. After Addalicia and the rest of the family moved to D.C. in 1885, he lived at Belmont until the house was sold in January of 1887. Joseph then married Jeanette Tillotson, and they had 8 children. He passed away in Nashville in 1938 at the age of 88 years old. The next child that we are going to talk about is William Hayes Ackland, and this is the weird deep dive because this guy is a bit different. So William was born at Belmont in 1855. He was educated at home with tutors and received several degrees from universities later on. He did receive a law degree, but he never practiced. He moved to DC with his mother, Pauline, and Claude. After his mother passed away, he bought a home in Washington. He was offered a post as Secretary of Legation in Spain in the early 1880s, but he refused. That's weird. It's so random, I feel like. In 1893, at 38 years old, he married Laura Crocker from Cleveland, Ohio. Ohio mentioned, woo! But they divorced the following year after their European honeymoon. What happened? What happened at the honeymoon? Something happened. William saw himself as an author. He published 3 volumes of poetry and 1 novel. He never really worked, rich people, but he was very successful at investing. He spent most of his time traveling, going to Europe every summer. He bought a winter home in, of course, Florida, where I used to live. Specifically, it was in Ormond Beach. I think that's how you pronounce that. He summered in Lake Montauk in New York and Atlantic City, New Jersey, with his sister Pauline and her family. He decided to change his last name to a more English version, which was Ackland. So his first last name was Acklen, so Ackland, but he wanted to change it to a more American version. So then it was changed to Ackland. No reason why, I don't know. He unexpectedly died in 1940 at the age of 85. So his estate was valued at $1.4 million and he left it to the art museum at a Southern university. There's a story behind this because it gets really wild. So Duke was apparently his first choice to donate his art to, but the university was unwilling to agree to one of the terms of his will, his final resting place. His final resting place was to be in a sarcophagus with a recumbent statue in the museum. Why? I don't know. Rich people stuff. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill agreed to these terms, and that's how we have the Ackland Art Museum. And it was opened in 1958, which was 18 years after he passed away. And you think that would be the end of the story, but on the Ackland Art Museum's website, they state something a little bit differently. So in 1936, William wrote a letter to Duke and to Chapel Hill, sharing this whole thing with them, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? I want to be buried there too. So please agree. So the president of Duke was the most enthusiastic respondent, in quotes. He was very happy to do this. He even had the university architect draw up the plans for the museum and memorial so that William could see it. and then hopefully he would fund the construction before he passed away. But William refused. I think because he didn't want to see it. It was just supposed to be like after the fact. He was very delighted that Duke did all of this though, and he viewed Duke as the Harvard of the South. Apparently, he regretted that he had not gone to Harvard himself due to family pressure. But he was fully on board with Duke, and he felt that they had the financial stability to create and uphold the museum. He could have sent some money though, I don't know. He wrote it in his will in 1938, and he passed away February of 1940. Before that year ended, the heirs to William's will tried to set aside the will, and they filed suit to test the validity of the trust. They're like, what? Really? Okay, are you sure? And then shortly after, the president of Duke passed away. Then the trustees of Duke refused William's request altogether, and it was never really made public to why they refused. Probably because this was crazy and probably a lot of money. I don't know. It then became essential to establish legally that William's goal was not to enrich Duke, but to use the good services of the university to further the cause of the arts in the South. In William's first will in 1936, there was evidence of this interpretation because he first mentioned 3 universities that he had approached. Then they found letters of the correspondence with President Few, which confirms Duke's commitment. So if you go to ackland.org, you can read all of the legal things, and there was a lot of drama because he wrote the will in DC, and DC didn't adopt some legal jargon. It gets a little complicated. Long story short, it was a mess since Duke refused and they couldn't do exactly what the will said. So they're kind of like, what do we do? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. Since Chapel Hill was one of the original 3 that he reached out to, this did help their case. So in 1936, Chapel Hill didn't really have a strong art department, but in 1941, they were very enthusiastic about this collection. Now the university had financial stability. It was now a state institution and was assured that it would have a graduate program in the arts. The lower court, for some reason, decided to rule in favor of another university, going against the trustees' recommendations of Chapel Hill, but they appealed this, and finally, in February of 1949, they successfully appealed to the courts to declare in favor of North Carolina. And then during this time, the Korean War was currently happening, and I wrote in my notes, this is crazy because my grandpa was drafted in this war, and now we're kind of in the era of my grandparents, which is some of this history seems like we were in the 1800s and now we're when my grandparents were alive, right? But because of the Korean War, construction was delayed. There was no available steel, but the university still celebrated. Apparently there was a lot of controversy around the design of the building because it was just kind of outdated for museum designs, but this is what William wanted. They did bury William in the memorial area, and then they finally built the museum in his honor. And on September 20th, 1958, it was officially opened and is still open today. And then you knew I had to look into the sarcophagus because why sarcophagus? What does this look like? And also what's funny is that I have done some interior design projects really close to where this is located. So I'm just we had some projects in Edge Hill, the neighborhood. So I think it's called Novel Edge Hill. I've helped work on that project before, which is super cool. Anyway, so I had to do some research because what do you mean he was buried there? What does this look like? So I'll put some photos here. So they created a marble sarcophagus, which is basically just a modern tomb. It's not like the Egyptian style. In 2023, I accidentally stumbled across this article. So 5 of the buildings at Chapel Hill have names associated with white supremacists, and they decided to rename those buildings, which is what you should do. Lee County, Florida. 9 more were being evaluated except the Ackland Museum. The name will remain, but they do have a disclosure about the name because it was associated with the slave trade. William grew up on the plantations, but he never partook in the slave trade. However, his family is directly linked to the biggest slave trading firm ever recorded in the United States. They were literally the Bill Gates of slave trade. I'm not kidding. And Adelicia's first husband, Isaac Franklin, was one of the founders. So the museum decided to change their website and update it to reflect a more correct history about William's ill-gotten inherited wealth that he used to create the museum. So they have acknowledged this and updated their history to reflect how they have all of this. On the wall next to his tomb is an explanation of where his money came from and how he never participated in the slave trade, but he benefited from it, but he also never owned slaves as well. This was so long. Oh my God, I'm sorry. That's what I wrote. Next child. We have Claude Melnot Ackland. Melnot is a very interesting name. Claude was born in 1857 at Belmont. He was also educated at home with home tutors. He received a college education and then became U.S. Postmaster for Angola, which is in southern Africa. So I don't know if he worked in the United States or in Africa during this time. I'm not sure, but that's what it says. He only worked there for a short time before moving to Washington, D.C. with his mother and siblings in 1885. While there, he was appointed Commissioner of Indian Affairs and assigned to the Round Valley Indian Agency in California. He went to California for a short time before returning to DC to live there until his mother passed away in 1887. In 1890, he purchased a large home in Elliott City, Maryland, which he called Greystone. Today, the house is called Elmont. We should go back to naming our homes. That's really cute. In 1891, he married Ella Manson, who was a former tutor at Belmont, and he was 14 years older than him. I forgot about this. So he was 34 years old and she was 48. Ew. I wonder if there's more to that story from when he was 14. That's concerning. He then served as the Maryland State Game Warden, and I had to look up what this was. So they do record keeping, habitat damage assessment, enforcement of conservation laws. Basically, they're the people that you don't want to mess around with when you want to hunt or fish illegally. By the late 1890s, he owns control interest in the Maryland telephone system in Hagerstown until he sells in 1901. In 1905, Claude and his wife divorced. He was 48 and his ex-wife was 62 years old at this point. Ella moved to Nicholasville, Kentucky, and she passed away in 1913. In 1911, Claude sold his home in Elliott City. In 1917 and 1918, he was a photographer in Jacksonville, Florida. This man was like, I want to know all of the trades. I want to do all the jobs, which go for it, man. That's awesome. Okay. So he was a photographer. He soon moved in with his brother William in Ormont Beach. He became ill in the spring of 1920 and he went to Baltimore to receive treatment, but he passed away in June of 1920 at the age of 63. Next child, Pauline Ackland. She was born at Belmont in 1859 and, like her siblings, received an education at home by tutors who would later become her brother's wife. That's weird. That's weird. She later attended a girls' prep school in downtown Nashville and Census Institute in New Orleans. In 1877, she went to France to study for a year, and she toured Europe in the summer of 1878. She joins her family in DC in 1885. After her mother passed in 1887, Pauline inherited the house that Addalicia was building at 1776 Massachusetts Avenue. She married the year after to James William Lockett, who was from Macon, Georgia. They had a European honeymoon and returned to live in her house in Washington. She had 2 children, Robert, who passed away at the age of 2, and then their daughter, Pauline. Her husband had a child previously of their marriage named Fanny, who lived with them as well. Pauline followed her mother's footsteps and became a businesswoman. She had holdings in Bib Texture and was the major stockholder. During the final years of her life, she was bedridden due to a degenerative spinal disease, and she passed away in 1931 at her home. And this was also during the Great Depression, and her estate was valued to be around $500,000 at the time, which is around $16 to $41.5 million as of 2012. Jesus Christ. And then just real quick, we're going to talk about the Cheatham children, which was Addalicia's stepchildren from William. So we have Maddie Cheatham. She was born in 1853. She was a teenager when she moved to the Belmont Mansion. She studied at the Patapsco Female Institute in Maryland. She married Thomas Weaver in 1872 at the Belmont. They had 5 children, and then she passed away in 1919 at the age of 66. And then finally, we have Richard Cheatham, who was born in 1855. He was 12 years old when Addalicia and William married. He went to the University of Nashville. He received a degree in math and natural philosophy. He studied medicine and started his practice as a doctor in Nashville with his father. He married Miss Emma Barry, which that's such a cute name. Hello, my name is Miss Emma Barry. That's so cute. And they had 1 child. He passed away in 1905 at the age of 50 years old. Finally, we have made it to the hauntings. This was such a journey to get here, but here we go. So the first ghost that we're going to talk about is Addalicia herself. People have said that they have seen a woman dressed in 19th century clothing moving throughout the mansion or just standing in certain rooms quietly. When she is walking, it's often described as scurrying worryingly, like she's in a hurry to get somewhere. She will appear only for a moment before disappearing. She is most seen in rooms of the house closely connected to the family, so some of the original rooms of the home is the most active. Some say that they can hear her and she will comment on the furniture placement or the upkeep of her home. Psychics who have visited say that she has a lot of grief, and of course it's probably about her deceased children. They often suggest that she is still searching for them. One of the tour guides states that Addalicia appeared in front of her, stating that the furniture in the bedroom wasn't correct. This girl, rest. You need to rest, girl. There's also a legend dating way back that her ghost appeared in a photograph in front of a mirror. So she was standing in front of the mirror. I wonder if you take a photo in the mirror, will she like appear behind you? That's kind of freaky, but maybe take some photographs of some mirrors. Many people have heard gentle laughter or fleeting visions of small children, especially like in the nursery, where they still have like their old beds and their old toys. Some visitors have described the feeling of just being very sad out of nowhere in the nursery, or feeling small hands caress them. Visitors sometimes hear the word mama being called out from empty rooms. Outside in the garden, staff have seen shadowed childlike figures near the gazebo or the statues. And the best time to potentially see them is at dusk. Many people hear phantom footsteps, and they're always like slow and steady with a purpose. Many objects will move without any explanations. Doors will open on their own. Furniture and decorative objects are often found in unexplained positions. Visitors have heard sounds coming from nearby rooms, but when they go to check it out, nobody is in there. Many feel like they're being watched, or they feel like there's a presence nearby. They will feel cold spots out of nowhere, or like a shift in the room. Motion detectors are triggered at night when the mansion is completely empty. This is very common. Sometimes you can hear soft music when the house is also empty. And I came across a website, it's called eerielights.com, and this was written by David Weatherly, who interviewed Susan, who had a paranormal experience at the mansion. And all of this is quote directly from the website, just to give credit to David. I was friends with one of the security guards at the time, and he worked in the mansion and on its grounds. He would tell me quite often how motion detectors would go off in the middle of the night when the building was completely empty. They would investigate, of course, and they would find nothing, and they would have to reset all of the alarms. A friend of mine had sworn to me that she had seen the ghost of the woman, Addalicia, right outside the building one night. A ghost that she swore vanished when she was looking at her. I was doubtful and thought maybe she had just been up for many hours studying, maybe she had been drinking or something, but she always swore that she had nothing to drink and she wasn't tired. Then one night, I was in the main building myself. It is a really beautiful building, and there are a lot of items that are original and belong to the family, like furniture and artwork. I was there looking at some things when I heard the sound of a child crying. I knew that there were no kids in the building. It didn't sound like a baby. It was more like a little kid, maybe 5 to 7 years old, crying from being upset or hurt. I only heard it twice. Then it was as if there was a silence beyond what's normal silence. I felt a chill, and the hair went up on the back of my neck. It's like that feeling you know someone is behind you, and it was almost like slow motion. I turned around and there she was, this woman in an old-fashioned dress. I know my jaw dropped and I felt frozen just staring at her. It felt like a long time, but I know logically it was only for seconds. She was looking around like she had heard that kid crying, and she had left her hand up on her face like she was upset, like maybe something like that. I saw her and then she just faded away. It made the whole thing even scarier. I knew right away that I had seen Addddditionally. Maybe she was looking for one of her kids who had died in that house. I never doubted my friend again, and in fact, we both had another sighting when we were together outside the mansion a few months later. We saw her out front and the same thing happened. She just faded away. I've been convinced since that time that ghosts exist and that Addddditionally still stays around that old mansion. That's spooky. My personal experience, I didn't really know if the mansion was haunted. I probably could guess because this place is really old and there's a lot of trauma that did happen, especially just with her children, which is just so sad. Inside, it just kind of feels weird. It's just like such a weird layout of a house. Like, I know he was like, I'm so excited about architecture, but the layout of the house was so weird. They had a lot of wallpapered, like, wallpaper stone, wallpaper, like, I'll put, I can't remember because it's been a couple of years now since I've been there, but it was just very different. Like, they didn't actually use the materials. A lot of it was just wallpaper landscapes of what they wanted. Overall vibes, it felt cold almost. It didn't really feel homey anymore. I didn't really feel sad or anything. I was just more fascinated, like, with the design and, like, what is going on here? I don't know. You just kind of feel... It just doesn't feel homey anymore. That's just the best feeling that I could get. I don't know. Now, I don't believe ghost adventurers or ghost hunters have ever been here. I don't think there's been a lot of paranormal investigations at this place. I don't think they offer any ghost tours at all, but you can always email or call to ask if you could do something. I don't think they do any overnight stays or anything like that, but I haven't really seen anyone do any sort of investigation here. But you can take a tour of the mansion any day of the week. Just look on their website when they're open, when they're available. You can take photos, but videos or photo shoots will need prior permission. You can also have an elopement here if you want. But guys, can we stop getting married at plantations? Why are we doing that? Stop. It's weird, bro. It's weird. I know some of these places are pretty, but like, you gotta look at the history. Like, don't ignore the history. Like, really bad people lived here. They were plantation owners. This was literally the Bill Gates of the slave trade in the entirety of the United States. There's some gorgeous places that don't have horrible history tied to it. Please, I urge you to just do a little bit of research before you get married there. Like, it's tacky. It's tacky. Oh my gosh. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna stop talking. This was such a deep dive into many different topics because I would just look up something and I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Like, what is going on? Especially with one of the children who got buried in an art museum that he wanted. And I'm like, what is this? Rich people stuff. Rich people be doing some weird stuff sometimes. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'm so excited to start my next project because it's a local place and I'm so excited. I don't really remember the history too well, so I'm so excited to deep dive into that. And they weren't slave owners. We're done with the slave owners, okay? I'm tired of going to these places. I promise we're done. The more and more time that I spend in Nashville and go to these like historic places, like, it's not good. I'm tired of it. Haley Williams is right about Nashville, okay? Now that we can go explore more of like the Midwest, that's easier to drive through. Like, I feel like we did as much as we could in Florida. We're kind of stuck at the bottom, but now the world is our oyster. So I'm so excited to go explore some more. And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!